Uh-oh. Okay, we'll start with this. Another look at a potential Sky Nicolson versus Ellie Scotney fight. A fight that, according to Fight Post, makes perfect sense. Sky Nicolson versus Ellie Scotney. A fight that makes perfect sense. You sense that Sky Nicolson and Ellie Scotney could quite happily go about their business without each other. Both are more than capable of going undisputed in their respective weight divisions, but there is still that feeling that for different reasons, they still need to fight each other. Despite a combined, unblemished resume of 22 fights, Nicolson and Scotney could still carry that underappreciated label. Their styles may differ, but both are immensely impressive at what they do. After win number 10 this past Saturday night in Nottingham against the tough Miyamoto, Scotney called for a fight with the WBC featherweight champion of the world. It is a fight that has been of interest for some time. The WBO, IBF, IBO, and Ring Magazine super bantamweight champion told me a few weeks ago that Nicolson was a fight she was interested in. It's not the first time I've heard Ellie Scotney make some mention of potentially moving up and fighting Sky one day. It's a great fight, but I don't really know if Ellie has the chops for it. You have to have the right footwork to pin down Sky Nicolson, corner her, and unload. And maybe Ellie has that, the footwork, but what about the height and the length and the punching power to put a dent in Sky Nicolson? Does she have that? Ellie's not a big woman, and she's not a big puncher. She's fantastic at what she does. One of the most skilled women fighters out there. But in terms of raw punching power, that's one of the few things she's missing. She's not big on power. Even at 122, she's got respectable power, but not much in terms of stopping power. And it's hard to imagine that you can put a dent in Sky without that, who's already a very tricky target, a very hard target. Sky and featherweight are definitely of interest. I don't feel at featherweight that there are people around there that will test Sky. There is Amanda Serrano, but she has no interest in fighting Sky, and you can understand that. I feel I've had the hard fights at Super Bantam, but you need the names. I want to get my name to stick in people's minds. I want to make a mark and be remembered. But it is also a fight that the unbeaten Australian would entertain. Nicolson told me earlier this year that there is some big fights out there for me. Ellie Scotney is a great fight on paper. I think in terms of a big money fight, not so much. But there are big money fights outside of my division, which we will look at when I am done with the featherweight division. But until then, the likes of Ellie Scotney and any other name who wants to challenge for the title in the featherweight division, let's go. Nicolson and Scotney do have unfinished business at featherweight and super bantam. Both are quite rightly chasing undisputed status. If given the opportunity, both would undoubtedly achieve that honor. But the politics of the sport do often get in the way. Ellie Scotney mentioned Amanda Serrano and how she's not interested in fighting Sky, mostly because Amanda has bigger fish to fry and bigger money to make. Who could blame her? But there is one other champion at featherweight that both Sky and Ellie could target theoretically. There is Germany's own IBF champion, Nina Minka. Sky's tied up with this upcoming Tiara Brown fight, set to go down on the undercard of George Kambosos' Matchroom debut. That's what she's doing in the not-so-distant future. If what Ellie Scotney wants to do is hit the gas on a Sky Nicolson fight, make that happen sooner rather than later, she can target Nina, move up in weight, challenge Nina for her IBF title. That would give Sky Nicolson a real reason to fight you, to want to.
You think Ellie Scotney can beat Nina?
I do. I actually do. Sky's got the fight with unbeaten Tiara Brown scheduled for March in Australia. A win over a longtime rival would see Nicolson seeking opponent number 14. If unification fights are not on offer for later in the year, Scotney could be a fight of interest to her. The Catford fighter offers her something different in many ways and would be, by far, her toughest test to date. The Australian often doesn't get the plaudits that she rightfully deserves. A win over Scotney would certainly help on that score.
Catford.
More so if Ellie becomes a champion at featherweight and a 2-division champion overall, there's still time. To my knowledge, Nina's not otherwise preoccupied right now.
I know of no order that has come down from the IBF for her to satisfy any mandatories, so to my knowledge, she's without an opponent right now.
Use Nina as a segue to Sky. The Shane McGuigan-trained protege would also benefit from a fight with Sky. A high-profile showdown with a heavily promoted Nicolson can only enhance the profile of Scotney. I also agree with Scotney that there appears to be a lack of real competition for Nicolson at featherweight.
I don't agree with that.
The featherweight division is much deeper than it's given credit for, and Sky Nicolson has really just scratched the surface. There are a lot of fights out there. The thing is, those girls don't have a profile.
They're not well known, so it only seems like there's nobody there to challenge Sky, but when you think about fighters like Sarah Liegman, Sophie Alish, Nigeria's own Elizabeth Eshuba.
What if Karis Oddingstall beats Raven Chapman in their upcoming fight? Raven acts as a common opponent between Karis and Sky, who still have unfinished business dating back to the amateurs.
Karis.
So it's not that there's nobody there to challenge Sky Nicolson, it's that those girls aren't that well known.
Ellie's more well known than they are.
And even Ellie isn't all that well known. That's why she's targeting a fight with Sky to get well known. And there are a few ways to go about it. You can settle up in your own division first, pursue the last 2 alphabet titles, or hit the gas on this thing, move up, and fight Nina.
Beat her, take her blue belt, then bring it to the Nicolson fight.
It all depends on how soon Ellie Scotney wants to get moving on this thing. I would prefer to see her unify her own division first,
Fast.
then move up. You're only really 2 fights away from making history for yourself, your career, for Catford. But ultimately, it's up to Ellie.
Billy Joe Sanders, so he just really he never really mentioned me. I don't know if that's like a pride thing because I'm Mexican as well and he's Mexican, or if he just really thinks I'm that much of a threat. But, I knew one day people were going to ask for that fight, and I feel like now it's amazing how much attention this fight is getting. And I think I'm even winning more right now the more he's putting it off. Because people are seeing, what if he was not... They offered him $70 million to fight me. That's before pay-per-view.
That's a real number.
Yes. You guys could call Luis de Cubas, Al Heyman, and ask him that. Before fighting me. So imagine after pay-per-view. And then what Canelo does, he pays the guy's flat fee. They had offered me $5 million.
It's really not a David Benavidez fight week unless he's incessantly name-dropping Canelo Alvarez in reference to a fight that I thought was dead. I thought he moved on from because he moved up to light heavyweight, yet here we are again.
Same shit, different toilet.
And the biggest problem with David Benavidez's account of events is where he says one thing, Eddie Reynoso said another in February of last year about this same subject. So all of a sudden, David's saying they offered Canelo $70 million for a fight with him?
Last year, you said it was 55. It went from 55 to 70?
Whatever it was, Eddie Reynoso made it crystal clear that no one offered them anything for a David Benavidez fight. No proposal has been made, no dollar amount, not 55, not 70, not nothing. Making this a bona fide case of he said, she said. At the very most, that's what it is, because David is saying one thing and Team Canelo is saying another. Who do you believe?
It's a redundancy to ask, because the Canelo fans are going to believe Canelo, and the Benavidez fans are going to believe Benavidez.
Though what stands out to me is that the number keeps changing. This time last year, Samson Lukowicz said it was $55 million. A year later, it's $70 million.
It's a difference of $15 million. It's a big difference.
And like all things involving Team Benavidez, they can never seem to get their story straight. Simpson says one thing, David says another. It's like they're not seeing eye to eye, or they're just lying.
And that's why they can't get this story straight, because they make it up as they go along as soon as the camera cuts on and somebody puts a mic in front of them. He said you can ask Al Heyman.
Oh, because Al Heyman is so easy to get a hold of. Never mind, he's been boxing's recluse, boxing's Howard Hughes, for years now.
Call Al.
I call bullshit. That's what I call it. Bullshit. Because David Benavidez and his team have a history of not being able to get their stories straight.
You can't get your story straight now. The narrative was that in moving up the light heavyweight, you were going to leave all the Canelo stuff behind, that you were moving on. But here you are still talking about him. So I guess you didn't move on.
Now you've got a fight in front of you that could get you one of those big Saudi bags, a big Saudi payday, and all you gotta do is beat David Morrell. But who are you talking about?
Not Dimitri Bivol, not Artur Beterbiev, not the winner of their fight.
They offered him $70 million to fight me. That's before paper.
When did you first set your sights on him as an opponent?
I think it was after that second Golovkin fight, because he was fighting at 160, and obviously I'm at 168. So I knew it was inevitable him coming up, but I always knew that I was a problem for him, because I was never at the forefront of, when he mentions the fights. It was never David Benavidez first. It was Caleb Plant, Callum Smith, Billy Joe Sanders.
You mean the champions. You mean the guys who had belts at the time. Because by the time that Canelo Alvarez started his undisputed campaign and moved down from light heavy down to super middle,
You didn't have a belt. You lost it, remember? So why would he have been targeting you?
why would he have been mentioning you? What did you have at that time when that undisputed run started that he would have wanted, that he would have needed? Now, maybe if you would have hung on to your belt and didn't eat it away,
You might have been on his radar. And I remember that at that time, the World Boxing Council extended David an olive branch. They told him that since you couldn't make the weight at 168, we'll offer you a top spot at 175.
we'll offer you a shot at Artur Beterbiev. Samson Lukowicz wasted no time saying, "First, let me say that while Team Benavidez appreciates your generous decision to install David as the #1 light heavyweight in your latest rankings, I am writing to inform you that David wishes to continue his career at super middle. Therefore, we request that David be returned to the 168-pound ratings, in a position that will make him eligible to fight in an eliminator fight, with the goal of regaining the title belt he wears with great pride."
They had a direct line to an Artur Beterbiev fight. They didn't want it. They didn't want it then, and I don't think they want it now.
Why do you think he's doing the rounds on all these podcasts talking about the same thing, the same goddamn thing he's been talking about when he's the one who said he moved on?
What he said in November of last year, but here he is.
Ahead of his second fight as a light heavyweight, on the cusp of fighting for undisputed. The opportunity is right there, but he's not talking about that. He's not talking about Dimitri. He's not talking about Artur. He's either talking about Canelo or moving up to cruiser for Zerto. And why do you think that is?
It's very obvious why. The writing is on the wall. You just don't want to read it.
If David Benavidez wins on Saturday, you can screenshot it, screen record it, you can quote me. He's not fighting the winner of Beterbiev versus Bivol. He will find something else to do.
Don't be surprised if he starts talking about some kind of injury immediately after the fight.
And that's if he wins. If he loses, then this conversation dies. It falls by the wayside. And what little hype he's amassed over time,
You're out of the running, and this is not a thing anymore.
if he loses to a fighter that only has a grand total of 11 professional fights, yeah, he's cooked, and this is done.
Finish.
What few Americans have tried to put him on a pedestal are not as interested in a fighter that doesn't have his O intact. That's the boxing culture here in America, a byproduct of the Mayweather era. Once you lose, they really don't think that much of you.
They won't think that much of him if he loses to a guy that only has 11 professional fights.
Never so much as faced a current world champion or even a former world champion. He loses to David Morrell, and he better not.
It's a wrap.
Some think that he's going to. Some are convinced that David Morrell will be the one to expose him.
Where does that come from?
Guy's only got 11 professional fights. Why do so many people have it in their heads that David Morrell could be the one to stop him? Well, part of it is David Morrell's physical dimensions. He's not a little guy. He's eye level to David Benavidez with more wingspan, more reach. So he doesn't need to be close to him to touch him. And even if he struggled with Radavalle Kalajdzic, In his last fight, David Benavidez fights nothing like Radabaye Kalajdzic. Kalajdzic is gonna move and punch, box, and circle away from you to take something off your punch, take away your power, whereas David Benavidez does the opposite. He characteristically comes forward, imposes his size on his opponents and his aggression, lets go of combinations, which create countering opportunities.
David Morrell promises, I'm knocking out David Benavidez on Saturday night, 100%. There is a difference in facing a fighter that's moving away from you and a fighter that's coming towards you. David is the kind of fighter that's going to come towards you. So if you have enough power and enough speed, things can happen.
Tack on that David Morrell is a southpaw. He's not an orthodox fighter like David Benavidez. He's a southpaw. And we know how tricky those southpaws can be. So there are some ingredients there that might lead some to believe David Morrell is the answer. David Morrell will beat David Benavidez, though myself, I'm not convinced.
And it's not because I don't think David Morrell is a good fighter. I think he's a good fighter, but at the end of the day, it's hard to trust someone after just 11 professional fights and not a single one among them was against a current reigning champion or even a former champion. To me, those eggs need more bacon, a lot more, before I trust the guy, and I don't trust myself.
Now, I don't like David Benavidez. I can't stress that enough, and I think he's a hype job. But not liking him, I can't allow that to cloud my judgment for this fight. I gotta look at these two guys and decide what's likelier than not to happen.
Just these two. Nobody else. Not Canelo, not Artur, not Dimitri. These two.
The way it could happen, David Morrell could establish his dominance early. He could establish his power early by using David Benavidez's aggression against him because he's not the kind of guy you have to chase. That could happen.
But what could also happen is David Morrell's early success in this fight could lead to him blowing his load later on. Not dissimilar from what we saw in the Caleb Plant fight. Caleb Plant got off to a good start with David, but he faded down the stretch. And the same thing could happen here, because this guy don't got a lot of fights and he don't got a lot of rounds.
Experience matters. How much do you trust a fighter that only has 11 professional fights? In a situation like that, it seems more likely than not that David Benavidez's experience will play a factor. Even if David Morrell gets off to a good start, it's not how you start, it's how you finish.
Think he's gonna knock David Benavidez out?
That would turn the boxing world upside down if it happened that way. And boxing oftentimes is the theater of the unexpected, though you never really know until you know. And if we are to just forecast what's going to happen, what's likelier to happen than not, it's likelier than not that David Morrell will get off to an okay start, but he'll fade and David Benavidez will take over. And if the story is a tale of two halves, David Benavidez will get the consideration, not David Morrell.
If it goes to the cards, and I think it's going to, David Benavidez wins a points decision, albeit a dubious one, because it could be.
I just can't trust with only 11 fights and not a single one among them against a current or former champion that David Morrell stops this guy inside the first half. It's a possibility, though not one I'm banking on. Maybe you are.
Maybe you'll be right. Maybe we'll both laugh about it on Sunday morning.
But I'm going to go conservative, yeah. I'm going to play it safe, and I'm going to go with David Benavidez to win a points decision. By hook or by crook,
He'll get the nod.
though what I stand by is he will not fight the winner of Better B versus B-Vol. That won't happen.